Right. Welcome, everybody. This is the third in our series, spring series of Zoom seminars on various topics in recovery. We always say this is meant to add to your recovery. If you're in fact in recovery, the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling has to do with attending meetings, working steps, maybe going to therapy if we need it, serving, doing all the things that we do. But what we do in these 1 hour sessions is additive. And so what I'd like to do is to open with prayer, and then I'll introduce our guest. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. As we end this week and we celebrate your son's death upon the cross, which has changed the world more than any other event in the history of the world and relates directly to our struggle with lust and sex addiction. And we ask that we might appropriate more and more of his death, burial, and resurrection into our hearts, into our lives, so that we can walk truly in freedom and in service to you. We ask you to bless this time, bless Eddie, our speaker, and help us to grow along the path one day at a time to freedom, joy, and service. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So we're going to be addressing an important topic, and the topic is blind spots, why eliminating your addictions is not enough. And for those of you who are maybe have attended SA, there's a portion in the White Book which is very instructive. And the author, who's the founder of SA, writes about not doing it. And he said he was focused on not doing it, not watching porn, not masturbating, not having sex with other people. And then one day he realized that not doing it was not enough. And so he went out and did it. He went back out there. And I think all of us can relate to that at one level or another. Today, we're welcoming back an old friend to Living Without Lust, Eddie Capparucci, who's therapy practice in the Atlanta area, now in North Carolina, as he tells us, is filled with ministering to people who are struggling with sexual addiction and brokenness. So he's going to share along this topic, and once he's done, we'll open it for questions. If something occurs to you while he's speaking, just use the chat function at the bottom of the page, and you can forward along a question that we'll give to Eddie when the Q&A time starts. So Eddie, welcome, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Jay. I appreciate being here, and I thank you to you folks who have turned out for this. Yeah, it's interesting what Jay was talking about there, with the big book and the author, that it's just not enough. Just ridding ourselves of the behavior that has just destroyed our lives, have crippled the lives of many people who, we love. It's just not enough. We need more. And what I talk about and what I've come up with is the concept of the new guy. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. What I'm going to be sharing with you are what I call the blind spots. And I'm going to take my screen and I'm going to share that with you. And hopefully I can do this. Slideshow. I'm not really good at technology, so, please beware, forgive me, okay? They wouldn't even let me push the AV cart when I was in 7th grade. It was how bad it was. So anyway, so our struggle to, emotionally bond. As you know, most folks who deal with any type of addiction are going to struggle to emotionally connect on a very deep level. We may think we're doing it, but it's really on a more 10,000 foot level. We don't know how to dive deeper. And I believe it's because of these blind spots that I've identified. And we'll get into those and I will share them with you. But let's start off with, why does this all happen? Well, it really start to happen when we're just kids. And the reason being is that we experience different levels of trauma and sometimes neglect. And trauma don't always have to be some major event that may happen, okay? It not mean that you're sexually, abused or that you become homeless. But, traumas can be the fact that, that kid who was your best friend growing up and then you're 7 or 8 and all of a sudden he moves away and it's so traumatic for you. And that is what it is. But there's nobody there to comfort or nurture. There's nobody there to explain to you. Nobody takes you aside. Instead, they're like, hey, don't worry. You know what? There's other kids in the neighborhood. Get over it. It's not a big deal. And that leaves us feeling very voided. We don't know what to do. So a kid needs to figure out on their own, how do I obtain comfort? How do I deal with this emotional pain that I have? And they have very limited resources to do so. I mean, they don't have a lot of worldly experiences. And on top of that, their thinking is more emotionally based than it is cognitive based. They don't have a lot of rational thinking skills. So what they're doing is they're going to learn. There's only one way to deal with this, and that is I won't think about it. I'm just not going to think about it. And therefore, what they do is they find ways to distract themselves from it. Too much TV or too much food. They're starting to develop the addictive behaviors at a young age because I can't sit with emotional pain. Nobody taught me how to do that. And it's that kid who I believe, if you've heard my other previous presentations here, is that inner child who's still in that time warp. He's still there. He knows our emotional pain point that we suffered when we were younger, but it's hidden from us. We're oblivious to us. In many cases, we're oblivious because we portrayed our family as very healthy and happy, even though it may not have been. Because sometimes we don't understand the depth of what trauma or neglect can be. And if somebody's not there to teach you how to deal with emotional discomfort, that is a form of neglect. So let's look at other things that are here. What are, if you look in the column that is green, these are things that parents should be doing for children. Okay. They should be teaching us how to connect. Right. And when we connect, that means bonding. So, what would be the healthy outcome of bonding? That means I can accept and I can give touch, both physically as well as emotionally. I can emotionally connect. I can engage in very meaningful relationship with others. Now, if I'm not given that bonding, what I do is I disconnect from my emotion. I struggle to self-regulate my emotion because if they appear or emotions of someone else appear, I feel emotionally threatened. Therefore, you're going to learn to shut it down. So it's either minimize it, you know what, it's not that important, you're making too big a deal of this, or I don't have time for you, or it's like you try to fix it, or you just withdraw. I don't know what to do, and you just move away. Right? Attunement happens when people teach you. Okay, there's two things that happen here with attunement. I learn that I can emotionally regulate myself. I can understand other people's emotions. I know what they're feeling. I can sense that. Um, and therefore, it allows me to develop empathy, which is very, very critical for it. So if you're attuned, you can be very aware of the emotions of other people. You have more tolerance for emotions. Okay, you feel safe with others, and others feel very safe and connected with you. If you are attuned, you learn not to be defensive. Now, how many of us can sit here and raise our hand saying we've never been defensive when we've gone through this? Not many of us, okay? And still, even today, it's like an automatic go to versus, having a sense of empathy and being able to say, look, you know what, I understand your pain and where you're coming from. Let's talk more about it. So, therefore, that's what the difficulty is, the unhealthy aspect of not having someone teach you to be attuned is you have a difficulty identifying what their emotions are. All you see is hostility. That's all you see. You see negativity, hostility. You don't see the pain that is there. Trust is a key thing that goes on because now I feel confident. If I feel a sense of trust, somebody taught me what that is, then I feel loved and I accept it, and I'm willing to take risks and chances in relationship. There was a psychologist, Eric Erickson, who developed the 8 stages of development, and trust is one of that. And on the polar side of it, he had it versus mistrust. Because if you learn to mistrust, then you're going to struggle to rely on others, and you're going to really limit how anyone can get close to you. And Erickson says that this is the most important of all of the um, bonding aspects that we should be receiving, because it really shapes our view of the world as well as our overall personality. Autonomy, that is therefore a sense that I can venture off on my own, I can be independent. So therefore you're not intimidated by making decisions. How many of us struggle sometimes with indecisiveness, and we're just not sure about ourselves? Are we making the right decision? We may have a lot of doubt, self-doubt that goes on. We have low self-worth, whereas opposed to here, we can have high self-worth. We're very sensitive to criticism. Okay. And therefore, and with, if we would have been given that opportunity to, develop autonomy versus parents clinging to us and not allowing us to experience things, not pushing us to explore, to be more curious, we're going to wind up again, as I said, being having a difficult time, you know, relating with people, because again, when you see the hostility coming at you, as opposed to being curious and asking the questions of what I encourage all my clients to do in those circumstances, we're just going to again go back to shutting down or being defensive. And finally, the last part of connection and development that goes wrong is the idea of love and sexuality. With love and sexuality, what we do, if it's done right, we can easily integrate sexuality and love. We see the two things go hand in hand, and therefore that enables us to develop these deep emotional connections. When we don't have this, what's going to happen is we are going to either maybe avoid being sexual, which is not the case here, or we're going to become obsessed by it. We develop relationships based on physical intimacy, and we'll sprinkle the emotional intimacy in to make people feel good. But that's not the design. That's not God's design for intimacy. His design is the foundation is built on emotional connection, and we sprinkle in the physical to reinforce that and make it stronger. This is what goes wrong at a very early age, which we have no control over, which we are totally unaware of. We're oblivious that not having these things happen in our lives are going to take a toll on us later on. So let me tell you Karen's story real quickly out here, okay? And Karen was the wife of a client of mine who had a very severe pornography addiction. He had been working with me for about a year, over a year, and he had done amazing work. He reported being sober. He was very involved with his groups. He was faithful to his counseling and his recovery work. But Karen was not moving toward him at all. And so what I did was I brought her in one day for a one-on-one session to say, tell me, why are you still keeping such a distance? And after I asked her that question, what happened is she leaned forward on the couch, sat on the edge of the couch and leaned forward and said to me, you know, here I am. I have a husband who has been looking at porn for years, who has really impacted our sex life dramatically. Had made me wonder what was wrong with me. Why did he not want me? And I'd ask him about pornography, and he kept saying, no, 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 that's not it. That's not it. She goes, now you're telling me, and he's telling me that he's been doing this work for a year, and that he is now, not doing porn. And that's what he's saying. I'm not doing porn. Well, let me tell you something. I'm not seeing any other changes in him. And I was like, well, what kind of changes are you talking about? And he goes, well, he comes home and he really doesn't spend a lot of time with me and the kids. He goes into his office to continue to do work, or he sits in front of the TV, or maybe plays some video game. He has his phone in his hand quite a bit. He takes it into the bathroom, which he knows drives me crazy. I'm just not seeing changes in this man. He goes, so what you're telling me is the only reason I should now believe and move toward him is because he's telling me I'm not looking at porn anymore. He goes, so here's my problem. That's what he was doing before. So what's different? And it hit me like a ton of bricks at that point. This happened about 8 years ago. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know what? She's absolutely right. She needs to see the new guy. She needs to see the guy who's different. They're just saying I'm not doing it is not enough. And that's what got me to the idea we need to transform the heart. That's what it needs to be. This is not about behavior modification. That is too limiting, and it will not allow couples to come back together to be able to reconnect the way they should unless this thing happens. And we can even see it from a biblical standpoint. Ezekiel 36:26. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. See, it is possible. It is possible for us to transform our hearts. Many of us feel like we can't, that, our hearts are hardened, that, this is just the way I am. But that is not true. It's not true. We just need to put the effort in there to get it done. So, in order to do that, what I came up with are the blind spots. And these blind spots are the things that stand in the way of helping us to experience joy and healthy relationships. And these are going to be the subject of a new book that I'm writing right now that probably will not be available until early next year. But it is going to spell out these virtues and issues more. And I start with up at the right of the left hand corner, almost where it says avoid emotional pain. And we go around, we have lack of curiosity, hypersensitive, struggles to connect, inwardly focused, lack of mindfulness, low emotional IQ, hide and lie syndrome, limited interest and passion, don't have a lot of friends, not a lot of hobbies, struggle to connect with God, compulsive and impulsive, fear. Fear goes through all of these, including mood and medical disorders, which we're talking about, anxiety, depression, ADD, and lack of contentment. So let's walk through these. I'm going to run through these, pretty quickly because again, we have limited amount of time, and therefore I want to be available to answer questions. So avoids emotional pain. What are we talking about that? Well, you know what? This is at the heart of most addictions. The people use substances, whether it be drugs, alcohol, food, you know, too much television, too much internet, keep going on, video games, go down the laundry list. Why? Because they're looking for distractions. And they're looking for distraction from emotional discomfort. And that could be just boredom for them. That they always feel bored. They don't feel very content. It doesn't mean that they're struggling with these awful, emotional crises, but they just don't know what to do in those circumstances. So they always seek to run away. Their inability to sit and effectively regulate this emotional distress is one of the key problems that we have here. And like, for example, like I know I have a difficult time just being able to sit. Just sit. I mean, sit with nothing. There's no computer in front of me. There's no tablet or book. There's no television. Just sit. I've learned to do it better because it's important. But I know for my clients, when I start talking about this idea of let's just sit, you can see the distress that comes over them in many cases because it's just not something that they're used to. It's not a natural state. As children, again, we're not instructed on how to manage those pain points. So again, we learn to run away from them. And now as adults, okay, that idea of distracting ourselves, we're still running today. And that's why I call my clients runners. That's what we are. We're runners. We're just going to run as much as we can. The lack of curiosity. Okay, this hinders the ability to go deeper in relationships. And and I'll give you a quick example of one. I had a client who his wife came home from a new Bible study that she just had joined, and he was standing in the kitchen eating a bowl of ice cream, and she walks in and he sees her. She got her book, she got papers, all of that. And he's like, "Oh, so how was your, your Bible study?" She goes, "Oh, it was really, really good." She goes, "In fact, I have, outline here of the course and stuff. Do you want to sit and we can go through it?" And he was like, "No, I'm good," and just starts eating his ice cream and walking away. He misses an opportunity. That curiosity started with how is it, but he doesn't continue to go deeper with it. So, and part of the reason we don't have this is because we're not challenging the children to be curious about different things. Our curiosity may be limited. I'm not saying you're not curious about maybe sporting events or maybe even cooking recipes, or you may be curious about many things, but we're talking about relationships here, and it's limited. But this is an essential building block for a strong relationship. We need to learn to be curious, to ask questions so that we can go deeper. The key to improving this is these open-ended questions that we ask. Okay, just not how are you? But we open up questions like, well, you know what? Tell me, why you've been, in a rather down mood lately. Those kind of things, that we're listening, trying to pick up what is the mood that's coming at me. And again, not the hostility. What am I seeing as far as the hurt? And if I'm not there, if I can't pick it up, which is fine, what I do is I go back and I say, you know what? I can see that you're angry and frustrated, but what do you think you really feel? What's at the core? Okay. And it's about being engaged, not just present, not just sitting there, I'm here, but actually being engaged. And sometimes that takes effort. I know there's times when I'm out with my wife and I find myself walking 3 or 4 steps ahead of her. I'm just present. I got to stop, wait, let her catch up to me because I walk so much faster than her. And then I grab her hand. So I make sure, okay, I'm going to walk at her pace. Now I'm engaged here. And that's something that we need to be looking at. The next blind spot that we're talking about is that we're hypersensitive. Okay. We have issues sometimes with what we perceive to be criticism, and it's not even criticism. And just if somebody says something to us with a little bit of a tone, we get all bent out of shape about it. We have a very difficult time in managing conflict. Okay. We take it to the level, which is not needed, because we don't know how to talk about our emotions rather than talking about the stuff. We're extremely defensive. I don't even really have to talk much about this, but that's the first thing that comes up. Hey, are you looking at her? No, I'm not looking at her. Versus, what gives you the impression I'm looking at her? What makes you think? And the reason she had the impression is because you're not spending enough time giving her enough attention. You're present, but you're not engaged. We're highly reactive where we're supposed to be responsive. And that is the idea of something comes at us, don't know how to respond to it, slow everything down. Slow it down. Think first before you respond to something. And we're always on guard that something's going to go wrong. We're waiting for that next shoe to drop. And therefore, that part of the defensiveness. We struggle to connect, to emotionally connect. And why? Part of the reason, in many cases, we had no healthy model. We didn't see that connection between mom and dad. We didn't see that sense of unconditional love and acceptance between the two of them. There was very little nurturing that happened in our family of origin. We could be surrounded by a really big family of people, but nobody really taking the time to, let you sit on their lap and talk to you about things. Instead, it's just we're busy, busy, busy. We're just existing. We don't understand what emotional intimacy truly is. If I tell my clients, I said, you know what, you wouldn't know emotional intimacy if it hit you in the face. And, it's true. And I was the same way. We have to learn what that's about. And we build our relationships, as I mentioned before, on physical intimacy. And we'll sprinkle in that emotional intimacy to try to say, oh, okay, you know what? Aren't we good? But we're not, you know? And the antidote for all of this is being able to engage. to slow down, to engage, to be able to be invested. You have to fully invest. And a lot of that is part of getting out of your own head, which we will talk about. Um, and part of this is, again, right here, inwardly focused. We are, because people don't challenge us, because those stages of development are not um, cultivated for us. We don't have people, as I said before, challenging us to grow mentally, emotionally, okay, spiritually. We're just not being challenged. And so, therefore, we spend a lot of time in our own heads and we stay there and we'll ruminate about things. We'll have conversations with people before we even go to sit and talk to them about things. We're worried about how it's going to play out and all of this. And we need to stop doing that. We need to be able to be more outwardly focused. We're very selfish. Okay? We are emotionally immature. I've never had a client who's ever argued that, you know, that comment to me. I'm not. That doesn't mean we're immature in all areas of our life, but when it comes to relationship, we are. We allow our emotion to trump others. So, we could be in the midst of trying to do a check-in and, wife start getting upset and crying. And it's like, you know what? I don't know. Do you really need to go there? I mean, why do we have to go there? I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to be here for you. Why are you crying? And why is that happening? Because guess what? My anxiety is increasing. And so therefore my anxiety is more important than her pain right now. And I'm trying to get her to stop her pain so that my anxiety will go down. And that's not healthy for either of us. I have to be able to learn to accept her pain and be able to say, okay, I understand what that is. And that's that idea of attunement, which is not there. As a child, sometimes we had the impression no one really cared. So if nobody cares, then what happens, I do become more inwardly focused. I have to, because if I don't, nobody's going to care about me. And with that now comes that idea of being selfish. We turn inward as kids to survive. This is the way we survive. And what happens though is that we stay there as adults. And that does not work well with our relationships. Our comfort is foremost. I want comfort and it cannot be disturbed. And anything that disturbed my sense of comfort, I have to deal with it immediately to get it out of here. And that's when I become very reactive to things along the way. That's inwardly focused versus, okay, there's some sort of discomfort. How do I manage it? How do I deal with it? Because I have to learn that's sitting with that emotional pain that I talked about. And my inner child recovery process, that is part of what teaches people how to be outwardly focused. There's the lack of mindfulness. This is key. This is huge. Again, it goes back to the idea of being in our own head. We engage in a lot of busyness. We're just always busy, always running, just constantly happening. We're unaware when we're being drained mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. I'll say it again, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. When you're drained, bad things happen. Why? Because the brain's screaming for stimulation. I need something. I am dry. I'm dying here. I need something. And here we go. We're off and we're running, and maybe we're grabbing too much food when we're looking again at inappropriate images, whatever it may be. But that's what's going on. We need to be aware of how we're doing every day. A partner doesn't feel like they're a priority. We're not making the time for them. We take them for granted, and that's part of lacking the mindfulness that goes on. We need to be mindful of what our emotional triggers are. What is going to trigger us? That, again, if you go back to any of the, I'm sure most of you have probably seen my work with the inner child, that kid is grabbing something in the emotional storage unit that matches up to the event that just happened. And those two worlds are colliding. And we need to understand what is that trigger that has gotten them there. So therefore I can be mindful when those negative events happen, that I don't allow that to happen. And I need to be more mindful about the needs and desires of other people. Again, this goes back to the inwardly focused. You're going to see that they're all rather linked together. That because I'm so inwardly focused, I don't really think about the needs and desires of other people. Hey, how about Chinese tonight? No, I don't want to do Chinese. Like, all right, well, they want to do Chinese, so why not? You know what? No, yeah, we can do Chinese. That's fine. Let's do that. You know, this is about becoming the new guy. It's the guy who acts differently in all circumstances. But you need to be mindful in order for that to happen. Low emotional IQ. What does that mean? I'm sure you've heard of intimacy anorexia. Very similar to that. One, we can't share emotions, okay? Because if somewhere along the line we were taught that sharing emotions is not healthy. One, nobody's going to care, or two, people are going to mock us for it. So it's like, it's dangerous to share emotions. I'm just not going to do it. Two, we don't really know what we feel. We can tell people that people can see if we're angry, they can see if we're happy, they can see if we're afraid, okay? But they can't see what we really truly feel because we don't even know what we truly feel. And we need to be able to go and identify that. That's important that we can express that versus one of those other things. But again, that becomes the difficulty of being able to express it because I'm afraid it's not going to be well received. It never has. We're very anxious when other people try to be vulnerable with us. This is what I was talking to you before about the idea that we allow our emotions to trump other people's emotions. Is because our anxiety level gets increased when people are trying to do that. We don't know how to validate very well. And our family of origin was usually not very emotionally focused. These were people who maybe ate dinner at in front of the TV, or even had dinner, but it was rather quiet, or conversations were at a 10,000-foot level, or maybe didn't even eat dinner together. Okay. People goes in different, ways. I had one client, I remember he told me, he goes, you know what? From the time I was like 8 years old, my parents would knock on my door, my bedroom door, and I'd have to get up and I'd have to answer it. And I'd answer it. They would not come into my room. They never came into my room. Never came in and checked on me. And they just come in and say, oh, you know what? I need this, I need that, blah, 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 and give me a direction. And then they would leave. And from a very early age, he started looking at porn. And his parents never realized it. It's because they didn't take the time to find out and be emotionally focused. And because of this, we don't know how to do relationships. And this is where we struggle. The hide and lie syndrome. In this case is where, you think about it, a lot of times people are talking about, oh, why are you always lying about everything? Why is that? Well, you know what? It's because we realize, hey, you know what? I got to fly below the radar. All right. Or I have to learn to lie and admit. And why? Because fear. I'm going to get in trouble. Okay. I'm going to be in trouble. So therefore, I'm just going to continue to do this, or I'm going to be a disappointment to people. So it becomes a natural habit. It's something that we do. And we wind up lying about little things like, hey, did you eat the last brownie? No, no, I didn't know. I didn't eat it. I mean, crazy little things. And if you're lying about the little thing, they're going to think you're lying about the big thing. And telling the truth also, in some ways, it relinquishes control. So I'm going to try to continue to roll through these because I think I got about 5 minutes left before we're going to get into questions and things. Many times people who struggle with these addictive behaviors, they don't have a lot of interest, or they don't have close friends. They get stuck in this comfort zone and they wind up being more isolated and alone. And again, it goes back to not being challenged as kids to be curious about things, to be engaged in different things. So therefore, I had one client who he wanted to get involved in several different activities like explorers and Cub Scouts and different things. And his parents were always like, no, we just don't have the time to take you there. And so he just sat home. He wasn't challenged. And so now what did he want to do? He just wants to sit at home. He doesn't have, there's nothing that challenges him. There's nothing that interests him. He has no passion. And what is he doing? He's existing. He's not living. And therefore, we need to look and say, okay, what are interests? What are some passions that we can have? And that requires doing some research and some experimenting to see what are things that you can bring into your life. The struggle to connect with God, in many cases, the feeling that we're unworthy of God's attention, we're unworthy of his love and of his acceptance. And that's all shame based. That's what it comes down to. It is our own, the way we feel about ourselves that we wind up projecting upon God. And also, in many cases, there's a lack of that male role model in our life. If I don't have that model, that male who I can feel a sense of connection and bond with, that's going to make it much more difficult for me to have that same kind of connection and bond with God. Our next one is impulsive or compulsive, which you really don't need to get into too deep. You all know about this. We're very reactive, as I talked to you about before. Whatever it is we're pursuing seems to become all consuming to many of us, you know? And what we do is we blame it as a habit. Okay. Well, you know what? The habit aspect of it is just the fact that we are compulsive and or impulsive. And why is that? It's because we're not mindful. Let's go back to mindfulness. If I'm mindful about things, then you know what? Being impulsive stops because I can slow everything down before I just run off and do something. Um, if you're looking for the difference between impulsive and compulsive, impulsive is I just react. I'm not even thinking anything about it. Compulsive, I know I probably shouldn't grab that other donut, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that's what you're dealing with. And to break this, we need to understand what leads to it. What is it that will not get you to slow down? And in many cases, it is because, again, we are emotionally drained or mentally drained, physically drained, spiritually drained, or we have been emotionally triggered. So, as I said before, you have to learn to slow everything down. In my thinking of addiction therapy and what we're doing, this is the number one thing to start with. You got to learn to slow down because if you can't slow down, it's going to be very difficult to implement everything else. And most of what we have to implement is here between our ears, how to use it better because we don't use it the right way. And part of that is applying speed bumps. We put speed bumps in the way to slow us down. Um, so, for example, might have, our wife say, hey, you know what? You seem a little off today. And it's like, mm, instead of, no, I'm not off, we take that as a speed bump and say, okay, well, why do you say that? Why are you meaning that? Or the speed bump of before I go and do anything, I'm going to take a moment. Before I take any action, take a moment. Is that a good action, a bad action for me? And also, we need to address what are the unfulfilled desires that we have that have not been met. And maybe in many cases, they should not be met, but we have to be looking at that. Fear, as I said to you before, is associated with all of these uh, blind spots, especially when we're talking about the idea of facing emotional pain, because we just don't want to do that. We fear responsible. Fear is responsible for many of the inactions that we take that we should be doing. The fact that I should be reaching out and talking to somebody about, triggers that I've had. I'm afraid that I may disappoint them. Fear resides in our inner child. That's what that kid is. And that's why we need to let him stop running the show or her running the show. And we need to take over ourselves. We need to learn to manage that kid's pain. But many people don't believe they're fearful. They don't want to think that they're fearful. But yet we are. We're very fearful. And we need to identify what those fears are. As we almost finish up here, we suffer from mood or medical disorders. There's a study called the ACE study, which is Adverse Childhood Event Study, that was done. And what it does, it showed that there is trauma. There is a correlation between kids who suffered from trauma or neglect and what it did to their brain structure and their immune system. And therefore, what happened if you're raised in a chaotic or neglectful setting that was resulting in anxiety, it could lead to depression and anxiety. And depression and anxiety are cousins. The ACE study also demonstrated that there's a correlation between the idea of trauma and neglect, and later as adults having different medical conditions such as hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, different things like that. Another, thing that we have here is ADD. That seems to be rampant among people who struggle with addictions. And partners, they pick up on these disorders that we have because many times we're just not aware of them ourselves, especially depression and anxiety. In many cases, we don't realize that we're depressed, but we are in this low mood, and it's called dysthymia, which is it's not as a low grade depression. I call it the Eeyore depression. Depression doesn't mean I have to be bedridden. I can function very well, but yet I'm just not, functioning as well as I should. And then lack of contentment. And where this comes from, it's the idea, first and foremost, we do a lot of comparison with others. There's a lack of gratitude for what we have. It's always what we don't have that we're looking at. We have a distorted sense of self that, I feel like I really haven't done what I needed to do. I haven't, achieved what I should achieve. There's the rumination of toxic thoughts. What could have been, what should have been, versus again, what is, and accepting that. Our priorities are usually misaligned. We're not focused on relationships, where that's where our priorities should be. Instead, we're focused on tasks and things like that, and we're ruled by our fears. Fears are where it comes down to. So, what the transformed heart, as I finish up here, individuals who eventually they understand how their behaviors have led to the exploitation of women. They focus on cultivating and nurturing healthy relationships. They're aware of the emotional pain points that impact their inner child. They have impulse control. They deal with emotional distress in healthy ways. They demonstrate curiosity and interest, and they understand what it means to honor and respect women. This is the new guy. This is the guy who everybody is looking for. When you transform the heart, this is what we have. And for me, that's a wrap.
Come on, Eddie, thank you so much for this. Hugely helpful. When you talk about the world is looking for the new guy, I think of Romans 8, where it says that the world, that we're standing on tiptoe. The world is standing on tiptoe. If you remember that image as a child, kind of looking over the fence, waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. And it's a beautiful picture. So we're going to get into some questions for Eddie. If you want to text one or go on the screen, go on the chat function. We already have one, but feel free to do that. Or if I can see you, you can wave your hand and I'll recognize you. But the first question, Eddie, is how do you define mindfulness, and any resources that you particularly like on the topic of mindfulness?
Yeah, mindfulness is, it's just a fancy word for awareness. Okay. I am more, again, we go back to attuned. I'm more attuned to my environment. I am out of my own head, and I am focusing on my what's going on around me. Okay. I pick up the moods, I pick up the actions, the body language of different people versus my head is down and I'm just running through life. Instead, now my head is up and I am sitting here and I am observing. I am of reality versus I'm just existing in reality. So, that's a lot that I threw at you in just a very little short amount of time. Mine way to practice mindfulness, there's two things. One, that idea that you said, I told you about just sitting still, just sitting still. And you know what? Sometimes it's just the idea of picking up something, looking at something. Like there's an example, this mug I have. Now, if I show it to you, you might be able to see light. Like you can see different lights, you can see shadows, you see different things that are there. You see the colors of it, you see the shape and thing, and you just sit and you stare and you look at it and you try to dissect that as much as possible to try to pick up what do you see within it. And it's really great if you take like a tissue box, because again, especially if they have like, designs on it. And especially you look at the tissue popping up and you can see the shadows and the folds and all of it. And the more you focus on that, when you go and you sit down with people, that you sit down and you put the phone away and you just be very attentive, you're really truly listening and not trying to think about how I should be responding. And I think that is the best way of looking, of how you can, the resources. Like I said, there's many books that are out there. I could probably go right over here and I could grab three or four. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Maybe what I could do, Jay, if I give you something, maybe we could send it out to people. But again, there's some good stuff out there. But the thing for mindfulness is you have to practice it. It is not something we naturally do.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I do is I do meditation in the morning. It's part of my 12-step recovery, and that is I just sit in the presence of God and just breathe and notice my breath. Any thoughts that come in, I just let them pass through, because that connection, that healthy connection, is something that I've lacked and is something that I need. And I use that time to connect with God in the morning. Um, Comment from Joseph. He says, "Thank you, Eddie. You defined my life. Excited to work on these items to become the transformed heart."
Mm,
So you mentioned one of these things. You certainly can comment on that, but emotional distress. Um, I think all of us can identify with that, that emotional distress can lead us toward our addiction if we don't deal with it properly. Can you just reemphasize some techniques to deal with that emotional distress as it comes up?
yeah, absolutely. And first, let me just say to Joseph, yeah, I defined your life. I defined my life. Okay, what my life was, until I started to become that new guy. We're all there or were there at some point. Um, the first key, what did I say before? I said earlier, what do I tell everybody about? Slow everything down. You are not going to be able to sit with your emotional distress if you don't do that first and foremost. And why is that so important? Because I need to understand what the distress is. Because many times what is what I call muted distress. Okay, there's something there, something off, but I don't know what it is. And therefore I need to be able to sit, to slow down and just think for a moment. And this is where you go back to what Jay was saying before about meditation, to be able to sit still and to fully relax, focus on your breathing and feel your body. What's going on? And I know you guys have all heard this. And I remember I've heard it so many times. I'm like, yeah, okay, great. Feel your body, sit there. I got it. You know what? When you actually do it, it's effective, because what you're going to do is all of a sudden realize, oh, you know what? Yeah, I got this little bit of a pain in my gut, or, my shoulders feel really, really tight, or, I feel this, oh, I got this throbbing in my calf muscle, whatever it is. That tells you something is off. And then to be able to sit and think, okay, so what have I gone through lately? And what are some of the issues that I've been dealing with, that I've been trying to push aside? Because remember, that's what we do. We're just trying to push them away, push them away, push them away. And to be able to sit there and say, no, no, I got to bring them to the forefront. So now I sit with this distress. Okay. I identify what it is and I sit with it. One, I say, one, I accept it for what it is. Two, is it something I can control? Is there something I can do about it? Is there an action I can take? Healthy, let me put the word healthy before action. Is there a healthy action I can take to be able to deal with this? And so let me go and take that action. All right. I need to go talk to somebody about an issue I'm having with them that I haven't been addressing, perhaps. If I can't control it, that's when I take it, I put it at the feet of Christ. I say, I'm giving this to you. I have. There's nothing I can do here, but I'm not going to allow it to ruminate in my head or my body. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to move on. So that J is just the beginning aspect of how you manage that.
Yeah. Um, Todd asked a question, a follow-up question to Joseph's about the transformed heart. What is the connection between the practice of meditation and the transformed heart? What are the indications that this is moving from an activity to a true inner transformation?
Yeah, well, again, meditation. If I can meditate, I'm my heart is transforming because I'm able to sit there with a sense of peace. And by doing that, now I can go and I can look at, okay, I can now be more outwardly focused, right, with people. I can now become more curious about things. I can now wind up, realizing, hey, you know what? There is no value in lying and hiding. I get nothing out of it. Okay, that was the defense mechanism I had as a child. I don't need that defense mechanism anymore. And yes, I may say something to somebody, I may tell the truth, and they may not be happy with it. Well, okay, you're not happy. I understand, but I was truthful. Happens to me all the time. I tell my wife something, and she's not happy with it, but I'm being truthful about it. And that for me is important. It's more important than whether or not what her response is going to be. So meditation means that you're able to slow things down. And that is, again, the start of everything when it comes to that transformation. The fact that I can sit and be still. And now maybe, oh, you know what? Maybe I start to hear what the Holy Spirit had to say to me. Maybe I really start to connect because I hear so many people say, I don't know, God never talked to me. And I go, I understand, but have you ever slowed down enough to be able to listen to God? And the answer in most cases is no, it's not. And I know it was only when I learned to slow down that's when I really heard the Holy Spirit within me.
You know, one of the
Well,
things that happens in meetings sometimes, or in conversation with addicts, is we addicts talk fast. And sometimes the more we're struggling and the more we're not sober, the faster we talk, because there's this sort of a control mechanism that takes place. And in one of my pastor preached a sermon a couple of weeks ago with an illustration that I thought hit me right between the eyes. And he was talking about driving. And this relates to self-centeredness and my self-centered attitude. He says, my wife's driving tastes are totally different from mine. He said, I go from point A to point B. I'm weaving in and out of traffic. I want to get there. She's sitting there scared to death. She wants me to slow down. So I have several choices. I can dismiss what she's saying as illogical and say, grow up, everything's okay. It's no problem. Um, I can say nothing and just continue on doing what I'm doing, or I can listen to her and take her feelings into consideration. It's taken me, I'll be 70 this month. It's taken me this long to realize that the issue and the difference, of course, my wife and I drove from the airport up here, and she's saying to me, slow down. Why do we have to go so fast? And all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, it's about her feelings. It's about caring for her. It's not about the speed limit. It's not about my ability to say that I can be perfectly safe or any of that stuff. And it was very hard for me, but I started to slow down and to focus on her needs rather than my own.
mm,
Difficult stuff.
yeah, but that's the new guy. See, the new
Yeah.
guy is not as opposed to, oh my gosh, you're nagging me. Why don't you leave me alone? I know what I'm doing. I'm okay. It is, oh, you're struggling right now. You're in pain. Okay, and I know I think many of us who, you know, men who drive, our wives go through the same thing. And now, especially here in the mountains of North Carolina, I mean, we have all these curving roads, and sometimes you're like over the side looking at it, whoa. And I'm hearing it a lot. And there are times I do well, and it's like, you know what, you're right. I need to slow down. And what I keep telling myself, even when I'm in the car by myself now, is like, you know what? Take it like if a leisurely drive. You'll get there. We'll get there. There's no need to rush. And again, that idea to slow it down. If I could do that when I'm alone, then I can more easily do it when she's with me.
Very true. So this is the last call for questions. Got time for one more if anybody wants to ask one more for Eddie. Someone asked about the recording. This will be sent to all of you. You'll get a copy of this within a day or two. It'll be a Zoom recording of this, so you will have it if you want to go back and make reference to some of the things that Eddie has said during this conversation. So I just want to, before we wrap up, just bring to your mind some upcoming presentations that we'll have. Next week, we will have Nick Stumbo, I believe, will be with us. Nick has his own ministry. The topic will be creating a culture of grace in my home, friendships, and church. Nick is one of the leaders in the sexual addiction recovery movement. I know you'll want to hear from him. Following week, Michelle Powell, certified sex addiction therapist, will be back joining us with a topic yet to be determined. And then on April 30th, Drew Boa, who's written a book called Redeemed Sexuality. He was a graduate of Wheaton College in Illinois, and he got the student body to sign up for kind of a sexual accountability discussion, which turned into a book called Redeemed Sexuality. Got 150 students, half men, half women, to participate in this, to talk about in a confidential manner their sexual struggles. So he will be joining us, asking the question, what should I do with my sexual desire? Especially a big question for people that are not yet married and have spending a great deal of time single, but certainly a question for all of us. And then there'll be others to follow. So Eddie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay in touch with us. You can contact me at j@livingwithoutlust.com with any questions or resources. And we will see you all next week.